Can you make me a co-host as well as, I'm not sure, could you make me and Charlotte a co-host? No, just two? Okay. Okay, we can start. Let me grab my screen. Good evening, everyone. I'll introduce Charlotte. She is a registered band member of the Montreal Lake Cree Nation, located in northern Saskatchewan, one of the 3 woodland Cree First Nations that signed an adhesion to Treaty 6 in 1889. Her greatest life accomplishments are to be a mother, an auntie, and a grandmother, as her role models shared the value of family and kinship by example. She has made Rosetown, Saskatchewan, her home for the past 11 years. She is a first language speaker of Woodland Cree, TH dialect. Am I saying that correct, Charlotte? And has also taught in the Plains Cree Y dialect and can understand the Swampy Cree and dialect. Wow. Hopefully I said those correctly, Charlotte. Charlotte has been engaged in higher education for over 2 decades, working to create change within institutions of higher learning. For the past decade, she has refocused her energies to building capacity with the First Nation communities. Since June 2019, she has thoroughly enjoyed the educational journey of being a PhD student and now a candidate in Indigenous language revitalization at the University of Victoria. She is co-host of a Cree language podcast, along with Andrea Custer, created by First Nations University. I will add the website that they have here, and loves to co-teach a weekly online adult Cree language group called Cree and Coffee with her mentor and knowledge keeper, Joseph Naitohau. She is managing 2 Cree language projects in Saskatchewan that keep her engaged in ILR. Every minute spent working in the Cree language to support the learners and teachers is a gift to behold for all of our future generations to come. And I'm probably going to butcher this, but she has it's Kinanas Komitini Tinawao. Please help me. Please help. Can you say that again for us, Charlotte?
Yeah, Kinanas with now.
There you go. So today we're going to learn and talk about and have discussions about Cree language revitalization in Saskatchewan, creating opportunity. In this session, she will provide a brief background on the history of Cree language education and revitalization in Saskatchewan through the eyes of a first language Cree speaker and educator. Language speakers often do not realize the extent of the richness they are surrounded by until they have experienced a new geographical landscape. She will bring you along the journey of Indigenous language revitalization and share the importance of language PD sessions for language teachers, speakers, and curriculum developers, as well as cultural programming staff to work together and share the vision of long-term language goals. Welcome, Charlotte.
Tinige, Kinanas now. So just wanted to say thank you. And, I thank all of you. And that would be the Kinanaskumtin would be if I was just talking to one person. So if there's just 2 of us that were in conversation, I would say Kinaskumtin, because that's one person saying thank you to one person. But if I'm addressing a group, then the ending changes. So the ending changes to nawao, and that's why you hear Kinanaskumit nawao. So that means that I, as a speaker, am thanking all of you. So that's kind of how the Cree language is always very specific, and I'm sure other languages are as well, in terms of who the speaker is and then who's receiving the action. If it's a verb, who's receiving that action, or who's doing the action. So it's a very descriptive language and very specific in terms of who's doing the actions. Before I get into, I do have a PowerPoint that I'll share as well. But before I get into that, I just wanted to say thank you to Grace and to Nina for extending the invitation to come and share, you know, just really just a drop. That's really all I have time to share, is a drop in the bucket in terms of Cree language, or I guess the experience with Indigenous language revitalization and my journey, my particular journey as a woodland Cree woman. And so before I go into the presentation, I just wanted to also mention that I'm not currently at home, so I'm in Saskatoon, which is about an hour from my home. And so I have some training that I have to do. I do training and consulting in addition to being a student. And so I have maybe 4 major projects that I'm working on at the moment. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that, you know, everybody is in different places, and, you know, some people are at home tonight, some people are coming in from borrowed places. And so I'm in a borrowed area. So if there's a fire drill or something happens that's out of my control, I apologize ahead of time if anything should happen during this session. But I believe that the presentation itself will be about an hour, and, you know, we'll have time after the session to do question and answer. But certainly, if there's something that you just have a burning question of, as I'm coming to a point on the PowerPoint, then make sure to just stop and raise your hand. I think there's a function to raise your hand on Zoom, so that it's more organic, and that I can hopefully remember what it was I was saying. If you raise your hand right away, I might not remember after 50 minutes of speaking. I wanted to say, you know, I have an extra large tea, and I also have a full bottle of water, which means I can talk for a really long time. But I also want to have some discussion. So I want to have some engagement, and, you know, you can post questions in the chat. I won't be able to see the questions or comments. So if Grace or Marina could just keep track of that for me, that would be really great. And, you know, just to start off, I think we have about 12 or 10 participants in the room. So whoever would like to go first, I'm curious to know who you are and what language group you're with or what school you're with. So whoever would like to go first.
Josephine, would you like to start?
I don't even see myself. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay.
Video.
Okay, here I am. Okay. Welcome, Charlotte. It's really nice to have you, and going to be our motivational speaker. I am the principal of our Filipino language school and Filipino language and culture school here in Edmonton. And we have established our heritage language back in 1971. And at that time, I have to tell you this, Charlotte, we invited the leaders of our First Nations educational leaders here in Edmonton at that time to join our heritage language program, because EDA was then working on its being able to get its permit or corporation. And so we invited your leaders here. Unfortunately, at that time, they said Cree or any of the languages is not really a heritage. It has to be a national language and so on. So they did not join our International and Heritage Language Association, which at that time was called Alberta Ethnic Language Association. But then in one school here in Edmonton, it's called Prince Charles, they started teaching Cree. Unfortunately, I don't think it has continued on, but I know that Cree was also taught in some of the schools here in Edmonton. So that's my background as a heritage language teacher.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Josephine.
Mm-hmm.
Maitri? Oh, you're mute. Yeah. You may see.
I'm overwhelmed to join the session. I had earlier also joined a session and it helped me in my classes. I'm from Edmonton Marathi Shala. We teach Marathi. It's an Indian language, Marathi, and the Marathi language speakers, they dwell in all the parts of the world, and they are very enthusiastic with the festivals and with the heritage, and they want to try to keep it continuous and pass it on the future generations. So I am with my mentor Anupama Deshpande, and she is also from Edmonton Marathi Shala. So I am here. I'm very much looking forward for this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Maitri, Anu, Maitri
Yeah.
tagged you.
I can, that's what I was asking you, if I can go next. Edmonton Marathi Shala started in 2017 with only 8 students. And now with the help of great teacher like Anjali, Karadkar, Gauri, and other teachers, the school is growing. Especially, I would like to thank Ela for supporting us and conducting such a great session so we can learn every time. And I'm looking forward this awesome PD session again. Thank you.
Thanks, Anu. Sylvia, you're next.
Hello, my name is Sylvia. I work at the Polish, Henryk Sienkiewicz Polish Saturday School here in Edmonton, and I teach grade 5. And I've been with the school, this is my 7th year. So every year I learn something new, and I'm in school right now to get my teaching degree. So I'm always looking for that space to weave traditional First Nation, Métis, and Inuit practices into my work too. So looking forward to tonight.
Lilia.
Hi, I'm Lilia Suhi. So I'm the principal at a Ukrainian school. It's called Ivan Franko School of Ukrainian Studies. So I've been with the school for 22 years, 23 as a principal for 20 years. You know, as a lot of students of ours are some 3rd, 4th, 5th generation, but there are a lot of new Ukrainian students coming. And really they, you know, growing there in Ukraine pretty much in not multicultural society, you know, we need to teach them what it is. And, you know, I just going to, looking forward to learn something that we could teach those newcomers about, you know, our multicultural society and definitely our rich history in Canada. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Bethlehem.
Did you say me?
You can go.
I thought I heard you say Catherine.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. I said Bethlehem, but go ahead.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. I'm Catherine Babawal. Silly introduction. I'm French. Les Petits Soleils is my preschool program. I've been running it now. This is year 18 since 2006. So I teach kids that are 3 to 5 years old. I actually operate out of a French immersion school, and my programming runs during the day. So I'm fairly different, I think, than the majority of the heritage language programs. French immersion is pretty easy to get access to in Alberta. We are in Sherwood Park. And I'm so excited for this session. I'm really very much looking forward. I'm hoping that I'll be able to bring some learning from this into what we offer for acknowledgement of First Nations days that I do in my program. There's a lot of things that I am implementing, but I want to ensure that what it is I'm offering in my class not only is developmentally appropriate for content relevant to Indigenous learning, but also really super culturally respectful and appropriate. So I'm all ears to learn some stuff today that I can pass on to my kids. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bethlehem, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Bethlehem. Thank you for joining us today, Charlotte. I am principal of Eritrean Community School here in Edmonton. We teach Tigrinya language here in Edmonton, and we start in back in 2016, and we teach students starting from 3 years old up to 12, 13, 14 years old, and I'm really look forward to teach new things today. Be glad you're here today, so I'm happy.
Thank you.
Sabrina.
Hi, my name's Sabrina. I am a first year teacher overall, and I'm teaching at St. Philip's School with the Edmonton Catholic District. Italian, I teach Italian. It's my second language that I grew up learning. I taught at the Scuola di Dante Alighieri for 7 years prior, teaching kindergarten and preschool children, so grade 4 years old to about 7. And yeah, this is my first year teaching in an actual district, but yeah, Italian has been something that I've been learning my whole life, and it's a second language. So yeah, I'm really excited. This is my first session, so I'm really excited to get to know everyone and get to know all of this awesome information. So thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Sabrina. Olga.
I'm from the Hellenic Heritage Language School of Edmonton and Region, which means that I teach Greek to 3 different levels of students. The school has been in existence since 1982, I believe, and I've been teaching there in total for 11 years.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Olga. Gori.
Hello, I Gauri Lahurikar from Edmonton Marathi Shala. Actually, it's a pleasure to join with you all because Eli is doing a great job for nurturing the culture. So Edmonton Marathi Shala is also doing the same thing because this mother language is our culture, and we are trying to inculcate different habits also and different new things also in our children through different ways, like we are conducting cooking activities or any hands-on activities to the children. When we read ELA newsletters, so when we read all about other schools also, so they are also following different things. So congratulations to you, and thank you for letting me join in this.
Thanks, Gori. Did I leave anybody out? I think I got everybody. If you haven't signed in yet, please make sure on the chat line, please sign in your full name, the one that you would like on your certificate, and your school, please. Thank you. Charlotte, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Usually I'm playing the role of Grace because we have Cree language PD sessions as well, and I'll explain them as we go through the PowerPoint. So it's unique and it's different to be in the speaker's chair and to sort of be part of the PD session from the other side, because I'm actually in the hot seat now, and Grace would be in the easy seat. So that's usually the seat that I occupy. I'm usually the one that's organizing and sort of getting things going and making sure everybody gets signed in. So it's good to have change and it's good to have role reversal. It just keeps us on our toes. And so as many people that can keep us on our toes, the younger we will stay. And so I'm really grateful to be here and to spend some time with you. I would like to have traveled to Edmonton. I have family to see in Edmonton, but I wasn't able to get away to do that. But maybe someday, you know, when I get to go to Edmonton, I'll stop in on the schools and just see where everybody is, because I think it's good to see a physical location as well. So I'm just going to start by sharing a PowerPoint that I created, and I wanted to go around the room. Usually when I do a session, if I'm able to, if it's a small enough group, I like to go around the room just to sort of hear voice. because to me, when I hear people talking and I can recognize then that voice belongs to this name and that name belongs to this picture, it for me, my learning is just, I guess, operationalized in that way, because we were raised with our language. And so you're always listening to how individuals sound when they're talking. So I thank you for gifting me. That's your gift to me, is to be able to introduce yourself and, you know, say what program you're in or what language group you're working on. So thank you so much for the gift. I'm going to see if I can go into here and go into my PowerPoint. Okay. I think you can see. Alrighty. So you can kind of see the trees, and you can see one tree in particular, and you can see snow. And so for my, you know, my comfort place, or where I feel most at home, is in this weather we're currently having. Some people don't find enjoyment with snow, but actually I do, because that was where we were raised, in the northern part of the province. And so for me to be able to see the trees and see the snow on the trees, to see the snow falling, brings me, I guess, childhood memories of comfort. And so I share that with you. If that wasn't your place of comfort, if instead it was not snow, you know, then you would go to where you belong, where you feel like you have a sense of belonging or a sense of grounding. For me, this is where I ground myself. And it's such a strong feeling, not just a feeling, but I guess a strong sense, that one year, I forget what year it was, I think it was 2020, I was off in Victoria. And of course in Victoria, well, until lately, there hasn't been a lot of snow. And so I called home and said, you know, I need to, as soon as I get off the plane, I need to go north. And so my partner wanted to know why. And I said, I just have to see the trees. And so he thought I was having a nervous breakdown, or something was going on. I'd had something happen on my trip. I said, I just haven't seen the trees for such a long time. So we have a trap line in northern Saskatchewan in our family, and it's just it's surrounded by trees. And so the trees actually move the way they're moving in this screen, and they actually talk. And so they talk to one another. And so just being in that presence, being in the presence of the trees, is what I needed to feel. So he obliged me. I got off the plane and we headed straight north, which would be about a 4-hour drive from Saskatoon. And so we went to the trap line, and, you know, I had the opportunity to just be outside and to feel the snow and see the trees that I have been around all of my life since I was small. And so that for me helps whenever I need to ground myself, or whenever I need to connect with whatever it is that I'm going through, or if I need inspiration, I just go outside to nature. And so before I start the session, I just wanted to do a small acknowledgement, a large acknowledgement for the land and the territory. I'm currently in Treaty 6, and so I'm in Treaty 6 territory, in Saskatoon, in Saskatchewan. But I would like to acknowledge and respect all of the Indigenous people on whose traditional territory we are all privileged to be on, you know, broadcasting from all different locations, and their historical relationships with the land that connects to our spirit for time immemorial. And so the language, the Cree language, and all of the other Indigenous languages have that connection to the territory. So they have that connection to the land. So when we're learning words, you know, one of the first things that we always say is, and I'll go through some of the words with you, is who you are and where you're from and how you're connected to that land. So for me to not have a picture of my home territory would not be introducing myself completely to a group that I'm speaking to. The other part that I've been taught from a young age growing up is to recognize those who have contributed to our work, or that have opened the many doors for us ahead of us. And so one of my mentors, one of my relatives, and a friend as well, was late Harold Johnson, and he passed into the spirit world last year, almost a year it'd be a year in February, I guess, February 5th, 2022. And so if anybody has not read Harold's work, he has lots of work that he's written. The latest book, The Power of Story, there was a podcast, or not a podcast, but a Zoom, a webinar last week here in Saskatoon. His wife, Joan, read from that book. And, just that was the last book that he was writing before he passed away. But he did his last interview with CBC radio 4 days before he made his journey. And, that's this link. I'll share the PowerPoint with Grace. But the link, he's talking about story. And, he just says, and now I understand that everything is story. You just tell stories. And so he's opened the door with lots of different books. He's written material that is used for cases, because he was a Crown prosecutor in Saskatchewan. But he's also written fictional materials, and he's also written material that is about some of the struggles that Indigenous people face regarding alcohol in all across Turtle Island, not only in Saskatchewan. And so I just thank my relative for doing all the work that he has done in order for us to open our ears, open our eyes, and open our minds to everything that's possible. And so I thank you for privileging me to share my story. And so part of the session goals are to go over the history of Cree language education, and to look at revitalization in Saskatchewan through the eyes of myself. And so I'm a first language, Cree was my first language. I'm a speaker of Cree and an educator of Cree. To also not forget about the historical trauma that we've experienced as First Nations in Saskatchewan, but across all of Turtle Island. And to share the journey that I'm on with Indigenous language revitalization, and the really critical importance that I find of doing language PD sessions. We started doing them about a year ago for language teachers, speakers, and curriculum developers, cultural program staff across the country. So it's not limited just to Saskatchewan. Cree is the common denominator. So individuals who are working in Cree, who are speaking Cree, or wanting to learn more about the resource development side of Cree language work. So the PD sessions bring us together to share what is this vision that we have of long-term Cree language planning of development. And so in this session, we'll touch a bit on each of these points, and there will be time for question as well. I was explaining that I would say, who am I? Awinanida. So that's asking the question of who am I? What are all the roles I play? I'm Cree, Nihidawian. So the Cree is the language that I speak. Nehiao Nea, Nihidao Nida. I'm a daughter, granddaughter, niece. I'm a younger sibling. I'm a partner, a mother, an auntie, a sister-in-law, a grandmother, great-grandmother. And so we have many different roles that we play in our families and in our communities. I'm also a candidate, a PhD candidate. I do consulting work with Indigenous languages specifically, but also in a more general context, working with Indigenous communities, First Nation and Métis communities, talking on a variety of topics that that I have experience in or that I know very well. I do training and facilitating for organizations, mainly in Saskatoon, in the areas of child family services, as well as teaching treaties in the classroom, and then other projects or other works to do with residential schools in Saskatchewan. But I'm also a learner of Cree. I'm a teacher and a learner of Cree, of our language, our culture, and our history. I'm a registered band member to Montreal Lake Cree Nation and a resident of a small little town called Rosetown, Saskatchewan, west of Saskatoon. And I'm adopted member into Plains Cree and Andi nations in Saskatchewan as well as in Montana. So my territory is mainly in Saskatchewan, but also down into the US. So when I think of where we're all from, we all have a geographic territory that we're connected with. In my case, I was born and raised, I guess, in northern Saskatchewan, so into the Woodland Cree or Nihitawiwin. So Woodland Cree is the term that refers to the area. So we're in the woodland area, we're in the forest area of the province, and sort of in Manitoba as well as in Alberta, in northern Alberta, but mainly northern Saskatchewan, northern Manitoba is where you'll find Woodland Cree, although we do go into Alberta as well. So Nihidawiwin is the language itself. It's the Cree language. Nihidaw, the first part of the word, Nihidaw is referring to a woodland Cree person. Nihidawiwin is the language itself. So this for me provided, I didn't know at the time, but it provided insulation. It provided me with a worldview, a certain way of looking at the world, of belonging to a family, belonging to a community, and then largely belonging to the nation, to the nation of speakers. But in the Cree language, it also included humor and compassion. And so, different words that are shared bring humor to your mind. In our community, we had a lot of kindness and generosity that was displayed, and that's just how everybody was taken care of. And so there weren't any people who went without, because the community values took care of those who couldn't take care of themselves if they weren't able to work or if there was an illness. So in the picture to the right are my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, so my mother's mother is in the center. Her name was Catherine, and to her right is my her oldest daughter, my Auntie Lucy, and she's passed into the spirit world as well. And then to her left, to my grandmother's left, is my mother, and so she's passed into the spirit world as well. So we were surrounded by women because the men were out working. They were home in the evening, but they were largely not around during the daytime. And so the daytime presence was really our mothers, and so our aunties, our grandmothers, and not in one nuclear family, but all of the families would do activities together. So that was just how we were raised. So we were surrounded by the teachings of living off the land, living in the land, and with the land. And so you became familiar, or we became familiar with the names for, the animals, the birds, their cycles. So they all have different cycles. The fish as well, the plants and berries. So everything that sustained us as we were growing up was our superstore. So the superstore was It's the outdoors. That was where, the plants grew and the berries grew. That's where the animals and the birds and the fish grew as well. And the fish, of course, were in the lakes and the rivers and streams. And so when I think about, how did those terms come to be? How did you know the terms that we grew up with? Because they were referred to on a daily basis. So Nokom would be the middle, Nigawi would be my mom, and Nitos would be my aunt. And so, why we had the privilege of my grandmother living with us. And so she lived with us, and then she also lived with her other children as well. So she would have a cycle where she would rotate and she would be with us for some of the time, and then she would go to her other daughter's house, to my other aunt's house, and stay with her for a while. And so we all had the benefit of her wisdom, of her teachings, and it was not anything out of the ordinary. A lot of our family and a lot of our community members had their grandparents. They had the benefit of having their grandparents with them, and so we maybe took it for granted that they were always going to be there. But fast forwarding and backing up at the same time, that we were living in a community, oftentimes if we don't know what that history is of the community or of the bigger picture, all we see is the pieces on the inside. And so we have the Indian Act. There was a lot of punishment that happened through the Indian Act and through the Anglican Church system, and through the Indian agents. And so the Indian agents were agents of the Indian Act. So they were the federal representatives that actually lived on the reserve. So they lived on the reserve land and enforced the rules and regulations, the bylaws of the Indian Act. The 1876 Indian Act that is still in effect today. There have been different revisions made to it, but the Indian Act is still the act that legislates the administration of First Nations both living on reserve and living off reserve. And the Anglican Church also had all the churches, but in our community it was the Anglican Church that had a really strong influence on the traditional cultural practices. And so it wasn't until I was an adult and had finished my university degree that I really began to see how all the pieces were connected, and that post-traumatic stress disorders, PTSD, were evident within individuals and family and community and nation. And this appears on media. It appears in mainstream media. It appears when you're walking down the street, when we see alcoholism or we see drug use or abuse. We see family violence, we see incarceration, and all of these pieces of PTSD lead to early and violent deaths. And so when I think about, I was trying as a young person, trying to understand, how did this happen? So I learned how to survive, to not talk about what was going on, to not trust what was going on, to not trust anyone, and to not allow myself to feel whatever was happening. So I became a permanent ward of the state along with my younger brother, and we lived in a few non-native foster homes. But thankfully we were allowed to stay together for a few years early on, and then we got separated and he went into another home, and I stayed in the one home that I was in. But when I take a look at our individual family situation and trying to understand, how did we, because I had my first degree was Indigenous studies or Native studies, so learning about the history of our people in Canada, and trying to understand, okay, how did we become disconnected? Like what were the pieces that disconnected? Nobody talked about it. So nobody in my family talked about it. You certainly didn't trust anybody else to talk about what happened. because there was a lot of fear. And so trying to understand why that fear was there and how that fear then became part of the family violence, and it became part of the oppression that people felt. And so it wasn't until I finished university that, and I was starting to learn about some of the traditional spirituality and the traditional practices like powwows or round dances or ceremonies, tobacco protocol. One of the language PD sessions that you had earlier, I think her name was Corky, and she talked about, some of the traditional ceremonies and the traditional protocols. Well, a lot of those ceremonies and ways were punished out of our family, and they were so badly punished that nobody talked about it anymore, and because of the fear of finding out. And so I was teaching actually in La Ronge, teaching Indigenous studies, teaching as part of a university program. And I would always ask my dad, we got snagi matutsiag, we got snagi nigamoyag, we got snagi nimitoyag. So did we ever have songs? Did we ever practice sweat lodges? Did we ever have any of these things that I'm reading about in the books? And he would say, no, we didn't do that. So then I asked, I just quit asking because the books were telling me different information, but I had a lot of respect for my father, and my mother had passed already. And so I just thought, okay, well, he doesn't want to talk about it and I can't push him to talk about it. So I stopped at the trap line one time on my trip home, and I could smell sweetgrass. And so I told him, I said, I'm pretty sure I'm going crazy because now I can smell it. And I know that we don't do it. And I said, but I'm not sure why I'm smelling it. Like, how can I smell it when we don't practice it? And you've said that we don't practice it. And he said, it's hanging right there. He said, right above your head. And so I looked back and I saw this big long braid of sweetgrass. And so I asked him how it came to be there, and that this was what I had been asking about. And so he said, yeah, he said, he said, yeah, I know what it is you were asking about. He said, but I can't really talk about it. He said, because you'll get arrested and I'll get arrested and we'll go to jail. And so I said, why will we go to jail? And he said, because it's illegal and it's bad. We shouldn't talk about it. And so I said, well, actually, I'm teaching about some of this. I said, I'm teaching about some of this in the university classes I'm teaching. It's a Indigenous Studies or Indian Studies program. And so he was surprised, he was shocked that we're talking about it. And so he sat and told me this story, but he gave me the number of a lawyer in Prince Albert who would come and bail me out and come and get me from jail in case somebody heard that I had this knowledge from him. So I sat and listened to the story of this, of how we became disconnected from traditional cultural practices and the role that the Indian Act had, the role of the Anglican Church, the Indian agents, the chief, and how my grandmother was disconnected and forced off the reserve. And that's why we grew up at the north end of the lake, of Montreal Lake. And it wasn't until, we were in foster care that we became band members again. So it was a long story, but in the end, I learned little bits and pieces. And so I asked my other siblings if our dad had ever told this story, and they said no, he hadn't. But they also hadn't been asking the questions that I had been asking. And I was probably the second youngest in our family. And so I had a close relationship with my dad, and always asked questions. I was always the one asking. And so he felt safe enough to tell me, but he also made sure that I had the phone number to the lawyer in case I got arrested. And then moving south to Montana, my traditional mom was from Fort Belknap Indian Reservation, and she passed into the spirit world a year ago or 2 years ago. No, sorry, 1 year ago. I guess this past September was a year ago. But it was through her teachings that, I began to better understand, Wakoto and being in relationship with others and having that sense, the sense of values of a traditional spiritual family. So I have an adopted family in Montana, and just all of the understandings that that comes with. And so it's been we've had a long-term relationship, and that relationship doesn't end because she's in the spirit world. It continues with her children and their children and all of the other extended family that are part of that circle. And so that circle never ends. It just continues to grow. So as an adult, I've had to learn to question the rules that we learned as children and living in trauma of not talking, not trusting, and not feeling. So, for others as well, not just Cree individuals, but others from other nations, other Indigenous groups, have also had to come through that point of, learning to talk about an issue, or learning to talk about a hurt or a pain or a trauma. Also learning to trust and learning to feel. And so those skills, or those pieces of who we are, were not allowed to, we weren't allowed to talk or allowed to trust or allowed to feel in the families or in the communities, because it was such a community of fear that you had to you had to survive the best way you knew how to. And so education for us was safety. So education provided an opportunity to learn. My parents didn't have an education. They didn't have they weren't allowed to go to school, and so they didn't have that opportunity. I think they both went to maybe grade 3, but they weren't allowed after that because it wasn't part of they weren't a part of that system. And so when you don't have access to education, then you're limited in what you can do. But they learned how to operate within workplaces, where they could be taught, certain tasks that they could do. Um, and then going into higher education, for us anyway, I think the first one in my family to go to school out of grade 12, and to really seek out, the balancing the elders' teachings with the knowledge that we were learning in the classroom, and also making sure that I attended wellness gatherings as much as I could, and then just reconnecting to our traditional ways. It's a lifelong journey. So it's not learning it once and then not having to relearn it. We didn't learn really how to write Cree using any kind of writing system. We learned English. So English was the language that we learned how to write and how to read. But we had to go back. I had to go back to a system to learn how to write standard Roman orthography using macrons. And then syllabics is a higher level. And so there are charts to follow to learn how to write syllabics, but it's a lifelong journey of healing and trying to bring all the pieces back together. So for me, that was my passion for language, was to heal myself, because there was a period of time when we were in care, when became permanent wards of the state. We were part of the 60 scoop, that we weren't around language. We were in non-native homes. And so the language that was being spoken was an English language. And there weren't any other languages that were around. Like we didn't hear French. I didn't hear any other ethnic languages in the communities that I was raised in. So in La Ronge was the next biggest center. So for us to be able to recover traditional knowledge, not only for me, but for my family and for my community. So that's been sort of my lifelong journey, is to learn for myself, and then to help others to come along with me, whoever would like to come along for the journey. There are a couple of books that I find most, and my cousin's actually, she was one of the individuals who was interviewed for the Kim Anderson book, Life Stages and Native Women. And so it's called Memory, Teachings, and Story Medicine. And Maria Campbell, who's related, a relative of ours, wrote the foreword for Kim Anderson's book. And so Rosella Carney is one of the ladies who, or one of the people, one of the women who's interviewed. And I just love Kim Anderson's writing because it's not written, she's a historian, but it's not written in language that would be hard to understand. She, she paints a picture of what this particular group of women is talking about and the stages of life that women went through from their own experience. And then on the right hand side is another book called The Strength of Women, and it's the same artist that has provided the artwork for both Leah Dorian for both books. Priscilla Satis, the author on the second book on the right. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the interviewees for Priscilla's book. And so it's called Akamemwag. And, it's the story of I think she has 15 women that were interviewed from across Canada, across Turtle Island. And, their individual stories are told in themes. And so Akamemwag means they persevere, those who persevere, those who don't give up. And so it really, speaks to the spirit of women, or the spirit of Indigenous people. And one of the messages that both Kim Anderson and Priscilla Satis share is that you have to know your story and own your own story. And so it's not, taking somebody else's story and making it yours, or, romanticizing anybody's life and then making it your own. But it's really understanding who we are, what our history is, where have we come from, what are we doing? So I always refer to the tsunami of colonization. And so not only was my family and community shattered, but it affected a lot of other communities and a lot of other families as well. And so when we look at residential school, it's referred to as a cultural genocide. So, abducting children at the age of 3, 4, 5. And, some of the participants tonight on tonight's call or tonight's training, we're mentioning that you have some of your students are those ages. And so when I think about the residential schools and communities that had no children, the 3-year-old, the 5-year-old children were all, they were all taken. And so they were taken with force. If parents refused to allow their children to be taken to residential schools, the parents were fined and imprisoned. And so there was a harsh reality that was enforced by the Northwest Mounted Police through the church system to take children at a young age. And so when we look at the definition of cultural genocide, it's designed to really erase and get rid of one person or one group's language, their culture, and their history through, systems like residential schools that instill fear. And there's a lot of psychological trauma that happens that, we talk about the intergenerational effects of residential school. So the trauma that children have that they then carry going forward. So 150,000 students is what we have records for that came through residential schools. And that's not including those who were not on the list or those whose lives were ended, prematurely. And we're finding, in the last year and a half or so, finding more and more remains at residential schools across the country and into the US as well. So we look at, how many people would that be? That's a large number. When I go back to learning about language, this is really where my learning started, was really in the church. So the Anglican Church was the church, the denomination that was in our community. and my first exposure to our language was through our psalms, the psalms and the hymns, the books that we had. So Nihidawi, when the left side of the page was written in syllabics, and my kukum could read that, my grandmother, and elders who were her age could read that side because it was in the syllabics and not in English. And the rest of us, the younger children, and those of us who were in school could read the other side. So the other side was written in a phonetic spelling. And so they were all in songs. They were talking, or they were hymns, so they were songs, or the psalms were written for the Anglican Church. And so this was, I believe, Archdeacon Mackay that actually wrote this book, and it's still in use today. So the Anglican Church still uses these materials. My first, I guess, introduction to being a language teacher, a Cree language instructor, was before we had technology. So, pre-technology, the teaching tools we had were really a cassette tape player and your voice. And so the format that we taught classes were all day long. So I taught in a university program that was, 9 a.m. to 4 p.m. So that was the duration of our classes, with an hour break for lunch and a 15-minute break in the morning and the afternoon. And so we really didn't have any internet at all. Internet didn't exist, but we had paper copies of materials. It was a grammar-based approach, and really it was designed to create literacy so that students could read the language and they could write in the language. There was limited opportunity really for students to learn how to speak the language. And, even though this was in, I think it was 1990 that I taught in the university program, for the most part, the instructional format and the approach hasn't changed. And so university systems continue to operate in that, using that same model of a grammar-based approach and really a structured approach to language learning, with not much opportunity for having practice speaking the language. But university was where I really learned how to read Cree and how to write in Cree, and mainly in the SRO, in the standard Roman orthography. We didn't have any formal prior learning. So in elementary school and in high school, there weren't any other classes. And actually one of the first language classes I took in university was French. I didn't have any French at all. I didn't have any knowledge at all of French, but it was a language class, and the advisor that I sat with, because we had paper registration, so the advisor I sat with thought it would be a good idea if I took French. And so I had no idea what it was, except that it was a language. So I took the French class and really enjoyed the conjugation and the structure that the class offered. And so the second year class became available, and it was an immersion class. I had no idea what immersion was, but I said, sure, okay, that sounds like a good idea. I did well in the first year class. So the second year class was completely in French. There was no English at all. So needless to say, I became really good friends with the French dictionary, the English French dictionary, because all of our work had to be written in French as well. I can't say that I can understand French, but I would definitely not say that I'm a fluent French speaker, but I'm sure if I got put back into an immersion environment, I would surprise myself and maybe the teacher too. We've gone from cultural loss to really cultural teachings, and that would be what I would say is the saving grace, because it's the education of Augie Marasti, for example. He was a band member to Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation here in Saskatchewan at Pelican Arrows. And, he wrote in conjunction with a prof at the university in the Department of English over a number of years, that he would come to Saskatoon or make his way or send, whatever he had written he would send him letters and he would send him journal writings, and together between Augie and the university professor, they put together a residential school memoir that was published. And so, it's through reading experiences like that. If anybody has not gone to a residential school or has no family members who've gone, to be able to read his story and understand the length to which children were punished, and then also the length to which they survived and the resilience that individuals have. And then the book on the right-hand side is put out by the Saskatchewan Indian Cultural Center here in Saskatoon, and really speaks to cultural practices and methodologies. And it's more general Great Plains or Great Northern Plains. So more sort of along the line of what the other PD session speaker was talking about, Corky. So, and it speaks mainly to Saskatchewan and what the practices are, and why there's a tobacco offering. The chapters are really short; they're like a page or 2 pages long, but it goes through, well, what's a feast? What do you do at a feast? What's a round dance? What's a powwow? Why do we have all these different pieces, and what do they mean all together? So it's a really good book. It's short. I think you can get it at the bookstore at Indigo or McNally, or from the Cultural Center themselves. And a couple of the other slides is, just reconnecting to these pieces of who we were, the pieces that were lost for traditional knowledge and ceremonies, and seeking out the knowledge and using, because the currency that we use is tobacco. So having a tobacco offering for the knowledge, or for if you're wanting to, if you have a question, or you have, you're wanting to learn something and you approach a knowledge keeper, it's always with tobacco, and sometimes you have print, and Corky talks about that as well, and it's mentioned in the Cultural Center book. Why do you have print, or why do you have cloth, or why do you have material? What kind is it? Where is it taken? What is it used for? Are people just making blankets with it, or where is it going in the end? So you can actually get those teachings from an elder, and they'll tell you where the cloth goes, and it's usually going into a lodge. It's going into somewhere to take your prayers that you've asked for, to take if you're coming for help or you're coming for appreciation, they take that and it goes, so it travels. It doesn't just stay with one person, it travels and goes, all kinds of places. So it might be an offering that you make in Alberta. That offering might actually end up in Saskatchewan or Manitoba at a ceremony, or it might stay in Alberta but not in that exact spot that it was offered in. And so it's just the strength, I guess, when I think about prayer is powerful, and it just doesn't have there isn't anything that says you can only do it here. It's not limited that way. Elder Mary Lee with the Cree Teepee teachings, it's called Four Directions Cree Teepee teachings. She has she doesn't have a website, but it's under fourdirections.com. And on that website are not only the Cree, she does the Plains Cree teachings, but there are others as well. So there's, I believe, the Blackfoot, there's Mi'kmaq, there's Métis. So when we go onto the website, the elders or knowledge keepers have agreed with Jennifer Wemigwams to have their material recorded, number one, and then printed, made available for public education. And so it's a really good website to just become familiar with, and to know what is all offered, and to get a sort of a bird's eye view of what are all the teachings across the country, and how are they similar, and what are some of the differences in between. My own journey for language revitalization started here, or officially started here, with working as a student assistant or teaching assistant for the a cohort of students who were doing their graduate work. So they were doing a master's of Indigenous language revitalization with University of Victoria. And I was asked to assist the students, or asked to be a helper to the students and also to the instructors. So I got to know the program and didn't even realize that there was such a field. I said, I mean, we've been standing in this field and doing this work for all these years, but we never knew that a field existed. And so that's the level of disconnection that happens across the country. And so you can be in the middle of the field doing the work and not even know that you're in the middle of a field because you're so busy doing the work. And so what I was able to witness was just, the group energy that happens, the magic that happens with a group. And, I've seen some of it tonight when, people are introducing themselves, because you're a cohort, you're a group, you're coming through together and you're helping each other as you go through. And so that was really my bird's eye view of ILR, of learning with the students and providing support to instructors. One of the outcomes that happened at the same time, and there's an article called Breathing Life Back into the Stories, creating the Circle of Indigenous Languages website under the WinHack International Journal of Indigenous Education, that talks about the history of how it got started and sort of all the roles that we each played. So, the Circle of Indigenous Languages, or Indigenous language.ca is where you can actually hear some of the language that has been provided. We did our historical archiving as well as to digitize some materials. It was in conjunction with University of Saskatchewan First Nation Métis Relations Office. And so there was a desire and a need way before I became part of it to have something, to create something where historical archival languages could be archived and they could be categorized and uploaded to a website. So it started in 2018 and it's still going. So it's one of the projects that I work to support along with others. And so we're still continuing to do Circle of Indigenous Languages website. Another project that started in 2021, and I guess one of the patterns that I see is I don't ever do anything by myself, and language work can be lonely work, as you can attest. Language work should never be done by ourselves. It should be done ideally along with somebody else. So having a co-teacher, having a team, having somebody that you can call upon for ideas and that you can support one another. And so the other project that I'm still involved with that started in 2021 is Korean Coffee online language learning for adult learning. And so it's offered in 8-week blocks. We limit it to 20 learners, a maximum of 20. There's a registration fee of $100. And I co-teach with Joseph Nitauha. He's a knowledge keeper and my mentor. And then I had started co-teaching with Andrea Custer Clark, and she was able to stay with me from January to June of 21. And she had other things to do. And so part of my role is that I provide some registration support for individuals who want to take part, along with the recorded session, similar to what Grace is doing for this session. And then we have PowerPoints that I create every week with resources for the learners, for the students. And so some of the feedback that people have shared with us is that they've learned in a small group setting how to ask questions, how to speak the language by receiving feedback and receiving support from ourselves as well as from the other students. It's recorded so they can always listen to it at different times. And it's also, not only language or word lists. We don't do a lot of word lists, but it's words, but it's also the culture. How is the culture reflected in that word? What do we mean when we say this? How does this compare to that? and what is the history. So, you know, etymology, taking a look at a word, taking a word and being able to see the beginning, the root, you know, the prefix, the suffix, and all those interplays that happen in one word. So one word can be a full sentence, you know, on its own. So it's a rich group, and it's therapy. So it's not ever work. And I think I mentioned that in the bio, you know, working in the language is never work. It's a gift. So I'm gifted to be able to work in the language. And, you know, I share that gift with anybody who is wanting to learn as well. And so I'm just going to see if I can get to the next slide. Podcast. So we're doing, Andrea Custer and I are doing a Peak Square, it's called. It was established in 2022. So it's an Indigenous language podcast. Cree is part of it, but it's not the only language that's on the website. The main focus is Saskatchewan. So Saskatchewan Indigenous languages is what you're going to hear when you go on the website. You know, we have a series we're doing right now with PhD ILR students. And so Andrea and I, we just have, if you listen to ours, I think ours is called Cree and Coffee with the Crazy Crees. It's Cree and lots of laughing. So if you don't, you know, if somebody doesn't know what it is, it's just, we have so much fun in the language that it's a healing language. So anytime we get together to work on language, there's usually a lot of laughter that happens. This one is the Cree and Nakaway language PD sessions that started last year in February or March, I believe. And so it's offered through Saskatchewan Indigenous Languages Advisory Committee, and I'm project manager for that. We'll be continuing until January 2024 or March of 2024 if we can. It's open to all language teachers. You know, I host it online and Zoom as well. I do the registration, and because there are a number of Cree language teachers, facilitators, knowledge keepers that all have a piece of the pie to share, or a piece of the bannock to share with everybody else. And so it's usually all in Cree. It's 2 hours. It's a 4-hour session. So 2 hours one night and 2 hours the next night. I do them back to back. And so, you know, some of the feedback that people have shared is that they have such gratitude to have a space for language teachers, because there really isn't that space anywhere else. And so I'm glad for the Language Association to have this space to create PD opportunity for teachers, because you need that. One of the other projects that I work on to support and manage and get involved with is to do with my band, with my nation, Montreal Lake Cree Nation. So it's just called the Cree Language Project. We wanted to keep it really simple. And it was established in 2022 as well, and it will go till 2024. So part of the work we're doing is we're creating an app. And so when we take a look at language learning, you know, we have a Woodland TH dialect, an app that we're working. The individuals are doing training on the app and then populating the app with all the categories and the pictures and the spelling, both in SRO and in syllabics. There's our group is made up of elders, knowledge keepers, language teachers, and, you know, just a whole wide variety, mostly female. I believe most of our group is female. I think we have two males that are a part of our group as well. And when I look at the language PD sessions, it's mostly female. And when I look at who signed in tonight on the PD session, it's all female. And so, you know, why is that? When you go to the Circle of Indigenous Languages website, you'll hear the story and see the picture of how we understand language from a Cree, a Plains Cree perspective, but also Woodland Cree and Swampy Cree, that, you know, language is, it's represented as the spirit. And so we have that responsibility as female caregivers to nourish that spirit. The word for fire is iskoteo, and iskoteo is composed of two words. The first is iskweo and ote. So a fire is really a woman's heart. That's literally what it's referring to. And so when you go on the Circle of Indigenous Languages website, there's about a 13-minute video that Ted Whitecalf provided, interviewing one of the elders, Mary Lee. And so she talks about the teachings around the gift of language and where language originates from. And it's in the language in Cree. And then there's a translation, not word for word, but there's a translation provided on the website as well. And so it's just, looking at all of those pieces for language, specifically for Cree. We've done bilingual signage on the reserve, so at Montreal Lake at both locations, because we have two reserve locations. We're translating children's stories for families to use, and also for daycares, because we have two daycares on the reserve. We're developing a strategic language plan for Cree. We're doing the language assessment, language status assessment, and providing support to leadership, to chief and council, and then also looking at adult language learning, what the needs are for individuals both on reserve and off reserve. So all of the participants that come along that are part of the committee are, just, I guess one of the outcomes is wellness and healing and health and humor. And so we don't have anybody in the language world that is not feeling better, that is, not feeling inspired or motivated at the end of a language weekend, because we usually meet on weekends. People are working during the week. And so for them, it's an uplifting time. And so just being able to work in the language, even for a day or 2 days, is enough medicine to keep them going for another month. So, one individual had trouble walking and, was doing language work. And, the next, because we had a 2-day meeting, the next day she was remarkably improved her ability to walk without her walker. And she just said, I don't feel this. Haven't felt this good in such a long time. She said, but I think it has to do with our language work. It has to do with how much fun we have in the language and remembering those old words that we haven't used for a long time. So I just wanted to stop and see. It's about 8:51. Do I still have anybody in the room? Because I can't see the participants. Everybody's here?
Yeah, we're here.
Okay.
We're here. We're intently listening.
I could be talking to myself for all I know. So I just wanted to share a bit about my research journey and then open it up for questions. So initially when I first started my PhD, and I really wasn't pursuing my PhD, but a PhD program was pursuing me, because I was not interested in going back to school, and paying somebody to torture me at a PhD level is not my idea of fun. But when I sat in with the master's students, I became intrigued by this area called ILR, because we are Cree language teachers and working in Cree language, but don't know anything at all about what's happening with the language revitalization or the language programming. And so that was my first area of interest, was to be able to support Cree language teachers, similar to what Illa does for the teachers here in this group. So I wanted to, learn about the resources and learn about different ways of teaching, language teaching methods, but it was a large piece. And so that's what I'm doing anyway with the project work that I'm doing. And so I had to narrow down my area of interest. So I just narrowed it down by chance, doing some research one day, and I came across an article that really spoke to me about silent speakers. And it wasn't Cree silent speakers, but it was silent speakers, I believe, in Alaska. It was Alaskan natives, or Native Alaskans. And so I was like, oh my goodness, like I see this all the time. Is that what it's called? because I hadn't been a part of the university learning for quite a while, at least 16 years. And even before that, I was a part-time student. So I really had not been completely surrounded and immersed in any kind of research or any kind of language learning, except for my own teaching of the Cree. And so I became really curious about silent speakers and wanted to learn more about their experience as learners and how we can, as a language program, working in language programs for Cree, how can we change our practices? How can we change the teaching practices so that their experiences are affirmed and that we can provide that type of support for them? So I would be using survey or one survey, interviews and visiting, and also focus groups. So that's sort of what those are the methodologies that I'm using. It's a mixed methods research. But I also had to learn about Indigenous research methodologies themselves because I mean, I don't think anybody really walks around or does their everyday world thinking, I'm going to read Research Ceremony by Sean Wilson. It's like, unless it's part of a class, generally you wouldn't know that, or it wouldn't be on just your own favorite personal list to read. Or for Linda Smith or Eve Tuck, like decolonizing methodologies. These are just some of the videos that that are available. So because we now have technology, you can read a book. It can be an ebook, an audio book. You have access to, numerous websites and videos, and so there's just an endless array of accessing materials to learn about learning about language. And so that was where we first started out with our language learning, was learning about learning and learning about Indigenous research methodologies and what they all were. And then for my area of interest for my research, I'm looking at silent speakers, so individuals who were raised in a home where the language was spoken, where the ancestral language was spoken, but they didn't become speakers of the language. And so what I found, or what I'm finding, is that there's a glaring absence of published research about the experiences and perspectives of silent speakers in general, but more specifically for Cree language silent speakers. So individuals who can understand bits and pieces of the language or the whole language, but they are not speakers of the language. So they're referred to as silent speakers or latent speakers in the literature. So some of the articles and some of the readings that I have uncovered are the latent speaker with Basham and Fathom in 2008, and then with Belinda Daniels Fiss in 2008, Learning to be Nihio through language, and then Angela Elijah. And I'm not Mohawk, so I'm not going to try to pronounce the first word, but we are reigniting the fire, a regeneration of Kanye. Yeah, Kanya and Geha silent speakers, and hers was a master's project through the University of Victoria. And the only program across Canada that has a program in place is the British Columbia First Peoples Cultural Council. So they have a silent speaker program. It's called Reclaiming My Language. And so that is with Susan Gessner, is actually written in partnership with a group in a Sami language revitalizing, or Sami language silent speakers program that was translated into English. And so there's material that they're creating. And then the Indigenous Languages Institute is out of the US. And Christy Belcourt's presentation talks about music and the musicality of Anishinaabemowin and Nehiyawiwin within ILR. And so those materials really talk to the needs of silent speakers and some of the experiences that they go through. The First Peoples Cultural Council uses CBT, so cognitive behavioral therapy is part of their program, of how they're offering the program and supporting silent speakers. And so it's a 10-week program. They do have some funding set aside in their in First Peoples Cultural Council for First Nation communities in British Columbia to apply for support. And so the variety of languages, I'll just speak to that quickly. In Saskatchewan, we have Plains Cree, which is the Y dialect, Woodland Cree, which is the TH dialect, and then Swampy Cree, which are the N dialect speakers. And then we also have Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota. And then we have Dene, Denisilini, and Michif. So altogether we have like 8, and actually there's 2 dialects of, there are 2 dialects of Denisilini, Y, K and T. And then we also have Anishinaabe, Mwen, or Soto. So we have 10 languages and dialects in Saskatchewan. So in the whole province as a whole. When we transitioned to British Columbia, I believe, has 34 languages, 34 distinct First Nation languages. And I taught a class for the University of Victoria in October in Atlin, which is the far northern community in First Nation, Taco River First Nation in BC. But they have 34 First Nation languages, distinct languages. And with the dialect differences and regional differences, I think there's 90. And so when we look at, is it just one language that goes across and kind of one size fits all, one language fits all? In Saskatchewan, we have 10, and those are distinct languages and dialects. And then there's regional differences as well within those languages and families. And so when we get to BC, then it's much more complicated. So they have smaller First Nations with very few speakers. And so when I look at, when I was sharing some of the work we're doing here in Saskatchewan, it's not part of the reality to groups that don't have speakers, that are working on really reclamation. So there's revitalization, and then maintenance, and then reclamation might be the very first step if a language doesn't have very many speakers or has no speakers. So in my research, I'm planning to do a survey, and in that survey I would ask for demographic data, Cree language understanding, literacy, and spoken use, and then also interest to participate in interviews and focus groups. And so it would be, available for a period of 3 weeks, using SurveyMonkey, using social media to try and share the information out as widely as I can. And then from that, being able to select or being able to somehow contact individuals who wish to participate in interviews, and then from the interviews then into focus groups. And so, my research would be really about making space, like inviting individuals into the room, and then making space, if you have time for a survey that might be 20 minutes long, interviewing individuals or having visiting time individually. And those might be like 60 minutes long, and then having time to come back to a group setting. And so those are all of the different pieces. I would have silent speakers who haven't taken any language learning at all. And then the second group would be silent speakers who have started doing some language learning or who've undertaken language learning in some way. And then the sharing circles would be also with the silent speakers A and B, with the assistance of a knowledge keeper. So for me, the sharing circles is giving back to the silent speakers, along with the proper protocol for the knowledge keeper as well as the silent speakers, because the language that they're sharing or experiences that they're sharing are very personal, and there is trauma and pain associated with being able to understand the language but not being able to speak it. So being able to create space for that. This would be what it'd look like, because it's an alternative dissertation format. So we have to have an intro and a conclusion, and then everything in between is whatever you want to do. So I'm hoping and planning to finish 2 articles that would be journal quality that I could share with a larger audience, and then 4 podcasts in English, again, for a mixed audience. And then a 20-page paper, a 20-page summary of recommendations for Cree language teaching and program design based on what the participants share with me on what they find are the most conducive environments for language learning coming from a silent speaker perspective. And, just some of the words of advice that I thought, I don't know if I have any words of advice, but I thought it was a nice slide to put up. To develop trust in your ability to create greatness, to be unique and loved by spirit for all the work you're doing, and to know that what you are doing is 100% okay with Creator and with spirit. Paying attention to messages from spirit through dreams and gut feelings or intuition. And how we do that is by spending time outdoors, but also spending time with ourselves and really, learning how to meditate, how to calm our spirit, when we're wanting to receive message. Message can't come if we're really busy and our mind is cluttered. So knowing that we don't have to have all the answers, we just need a few good questions to start off. And how can my work help to revitalize, strengthen, or reawaken the spoken language? Because we can read and we can write, but if we're not speaking, then the language spirit is not being fed. And so the language spirit has to be fed all the time. And we feed that spirit by speaking, by practicing, by trying something. Be kind to yourself, have fun and laugh at ourselves first, and looking back and learning from the experience of others, and having sessions like this. It's essentially the research cycle in motion. So when we're learning from others, we're engaged in research, but sometimes it's not called research. It's just learning from others. Keeping a journal of dreams, a creative journal, and a fact-filled journal. And for me, writing is therapy. And that's my contact information. I'll share the PowerPoint with Grace, and she can share it out with a larger group.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. It is really enlightening, and to be able to tell your story and for us to, learn from you and the history and the understanding of your people and, the journey that you had taken. Thank you. Are there any questions or discussion points?
Thank you so much.
Does anyone have a question? Josephine.
Charlotte, thank you very much for such an enlightening presentation. I did not realize, the depth of your history. And maybe if you can really share the Indian Act with us, because that would be one thing that we could also want to teach our children in our heritage language program, because there's a need to know who we are. There's a need to know our brothers that are here, because it's so unfortunate whatever happened to you. My first experience here in Canada as a teacher is teaching up in Laclabish. It's a northern part of Alberta. And when the children saw me, right away, they came to me, especially my grade 1 children. They would say, "Teacher, are you native like us?" And I said, "Yes, I am, except I am Asian and you are Canadian." And so they started laughing. I was the only one that went to really visit them at the reserve, at Kikinau Reserve. And it was so beautiful to really meet them. But with your presentation, I did not realize how much trauma even your millennial generation is going through at this point. Okay, you are a very strong nation, Charlotte. And I'm really surprised how you did not even dare to revolt against the colonizers. Because many of us right now that have listened to you experience, the revolution that our forefathers did to our colonizers. That's the reason why we were able to bring back our own independence and became who we are. But now you're starting it, and you will be the future generation leaders and so on. And with you doing all these things, I'm sure your millennial group will continue on. So it would be nice if you can connect with our heritage language program with Grace or Antonella or Marina all the time, so that we can really exchange methodologies, how, you know, your group will be learning how to read, because there's the one that you just gave, a resource on methods or the mixed methods of learning and teaching Cree. That would be very interesting, Charlotte, if you can share that with us one time. So thank you very much for your very inspiring and motivational talk tonight. Much appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Josephine. What I'll do is I'll send a few resources out to Grace because I have her email address, and you know, she can share it out with everybody who's in attendance. But there's a very good website. Everything you wanted to know. No, what's it called? 21 things you wanted to know about the Indian Act. It's written in a very straightforward way. There's material that you can access. There's some websites you can access as well.
Okay.
And then I'll also share the material on the residential schools, because they're, for anybody who wasn't able to attend like the national gatherings or any of the regional gatherings, any of the testimonies that students who are adults now and elders that they gave, you can go back historically and look on the TRC website and the NCTR website to be able to listen to some of the stories and some of the educational materials that were created as a result of it. Yeah,
because I was a part of your first Truth and Reconciliation Conference here in Edmonton, and that was very powerful. Yeah, it was very powerful. Yes.
Awesome.
Oh, thank you for that resource. I would really love to go through the Indian Act, you know?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
You're welcome. And I know where Laklabish is. My sister used to live there.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Charlotte, are you going to be sending us the your slides?
PowerPoint? Yeah, I'll send you the PowerPoint.
Okay. Yeah, because I think there were books there. I was trying to write it down, and and I thought, and then you said that you were sending it. I'm like, okay, I think she's going to send the whole thing. Yeah. So
yeah, I'll send you the whole.
Right. So there's a question here from Bangla language. Is the 21 things, is that a website or is that also a book?
It's a book, but it's also a website. And so I think they have it organized so that it's a website, but then you can actually go in and learn more material in a workshop format. And, you know, the 21 things about 21 things you didn't know about the Indian Act, I think is what the first book is called. And so he's just out of BC, he's always writing, and, you know, he has a legal background, and he's just, you know, very simple to read and simple to understand. And so I like using his material. OTC has material as well, the Office of the Treaty Commissioner, because I do some training for them on teaching treaties in the classroom. So it's been mandated and required to teach about treaties in the classroom in Saskatchewan, I believe, since 2007. And so, you know, we've had that support from the provincial government for all the provincial schools to teach about treaties in the classroom, but also the band schools or the First Nation schools. They're not mandated by the province, but they also received, it's called a treaty kit. So they have like a box of material and you know, the binders and the material lesson plans for each grade level from kindergarten to grade 12. And I always say for treaties, you know, we're all starting off at kindergarten. So it's fine to start off with kindergarten. Teaching treaties in the classroom gives a Saskatchewan perspective regarding treaties, but because we have similarities with Alberta, especially, and with Manitoba, it's like the teaching treaties in the classroom can almost be used for all 3 provinces, but it really focuses in on the treaty areas for Saskatchewan. But I'll share that website as well.
Yeah, and it says, is it by Bob Joseph?
Bob Joseph, yeah, he's the author.
Okay,
And there's
they just wanted
he's
to know
got-
that they have the right one.
yeah, he's a great author. And in our language PD sessions that we do, that I organize monthly I do them monthly for the Cree and the Nakaway, or the Anishinaabe language in Saskatchewan. Well, they're not just in Saskatchewan, but we organize them out of Saskatchewan. They're open to anybody across the country. So, in there, people talk about the specifically language teaching methods that they're using. So TPR, total physical response. They talk about ASLA, accelerated second language acquisition, and a whole variety of other kinds of language supports and language resources that are being created for Cree language learning or for Anishinaabe when learning. That can be used in any language setting for individuals wanting to learn those 2 languages.
Okay. Any other questions for Charlotte? We will also have her email. So if you want to, if your school wants to reach out to her, I'm sure Charlotte would be able to answer your questions as well. And yeah, those resources are really great, Charlotte. And sometimes even with our own heritage, we have, especially with our association, we have like seniors. This is something like, because they're basically, they came here with a different notion, right? They came here with a different notion of the Indigenous people who live here in Canada. So having those resources really enlightens, that historical part and that. So just getting that information to them and accepting it. And the children are the children, I find, they're very accepting.
Yeah.
So telling those stories and they're like, oh, okay, I knew that, right? And even though they don't, it's just like for them, it's like they're so accepting that you give them the information and they'll absorb it.
Yeah.
And in their minds, it's like, well, why is it different? Right? Because I know I have a friend who, and they don't see color. They don't see differences, right? So that's I think that's more of a learned characteristics.
No, I think it's really valuable to work with both the older population, and we're all moving into that older population every hour, every day. So the older population as well as the young ones coming in. And so just being able to work with the variety, because we can still learn different things about other cultures, about other histories, and learning what are the similarities we have, and then what are some of the differences we have. So how can we work together on the similarities, and then how can we come to an understanding on why we have different ways of doing things, and that we're not at opposite ends of the field. We're just all part of the field, but we're in different spots.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate just being able to come and share and make some more, I'm always improving or increasing my circle. So my circle is Wako Twin, Wako Mag. So who am I all related to? And we become related in different ways, but by sharing, who we are, why we're working in this area. It's it's an energy giving profession that we're in, because we get energy from working in the language, and we are all emotionally closely connected to our languages. And I think that's the beauty of language work. I'm always welcoming to anybody who wants to help with Cree language. You don't have to be Cree, but you have to have respect. And so you have to have the history of the language and the culture. It's not for exploitation, but it's for protection. And so, you know, if you purple polka dots, striped, zebra, we don't care, as long as you are willing to help us to strengthen the language. You know, we welcome all teachers. So thank you again for the time to be here tonight and to share a few stories with you.
Yeah. Does anybody else have a question? I do have a loaded question, so if anybody else would like to. So my loaded question, oh, Catherine, I know you wanted to speak there. Go ahead.
Thank you. I mostly wanted just to say thank you, Charlotte. I think this has been a really fascinating presentation. I've studied language lots and lots my whole life, and the silent speakers is very fascinating, a very fascinating concept to me. I'm trying to imagine, I've taught students of all ages from 3 up to adults, and to consider that you have a base in a language, but you've never actually had the oral production of the language. That's really an interesting prospect for me as a teacher to consider. Wow, like, how do you do that? That's so neat. Like, I'm wondering from my own perspective to be like, can I watch people learn this when they know and they hear, but they've never produced it? That's wow. That's one thing I wanted to know. And second, can any of your courses that you take, is that anything that us language lovers could ever get in on? I think it would be really cool to at least have a base understanding for how the grammar and the syntax works in Cree for comparison to other languages that I've learned. So I'd be curious to know whether English speakers or French speakers or whatever we are could get in on that.
Oh, definitely. We actually have one of our, in the Cree coffee group, I don't think she would mind me sharing. She's fluent French, so French is her first language, and she's taken an interest in Cree, and she's actually, I think she finished her BA in Cree, and so she's quite proficient in the reading and the writing of Cree. And so she wanted to learn more about the speaking, and so she joined the group 2 years ago. She's like spot on for pronunciation and understanding, and she's our conjugating queen. And you know, she's just a phenomenal resource to have. And so anybody can join at any time. We run the Korean coffee January, February, and then we go every 2 months. So we've just started our January, February session, and then we'll go March, April, and you just continue all. So I just said, you know, we'll go for time, eternity, time immemorial, as long as there's an interest for the adult Cree language learning in a small group in an online setting, because we really can't travel out to other locations. But anybody can join that wants. We had one learner come in from, I think she was from Italy, and so she was Italian, and her pronunciation was just amazing. And so, you know, we've had everybody from Italy, Australia, all over Canada, into the US. And so the Korean coffee group is quite diverse. We seem to just attract people learners who are really committed and dedicated to learning, and really surround themselves with the Cree, not only the written material, but also the audio material. There's just lots of resources that are available now that were never available 20 years ago or 30 years ago.
That's wonderful. Is that information that will be provided to Grace for us to follow up if we're interested?
Yeah, I'll provide it as well. I just call it the Korean coffee. And then the podcast as well, like the podcasts are all in the language. And the Big Squewen website is not just Cree, but it's also Dene and Soto and Michif and Dakota, Lakota, Nakota. So there's all the languages for Saskatchewan. And it's operated through First Nations University, I believe, of Canada.
Wonderful.
So they've just offered it. Yeah.
One other comment, and maybe this is a suggestion, Grace, for Eli, in response to what Josephine is saying. I have a staff of 20 people through both my French immersion preschool, but also my out of school care program that I run. And we recently did the blanket activity. I wonder
Okay.
perhaps if that could be something that we could organize for ELA, as far as trying to get a better understanding for those that want to learn a bit more about the Indian Act, because I found
Mhm.
that to be a very emotional and moving, but also incredibly knowledge rich experience for really properly appreciating the perspective of Indigenous people with colonization.
Mhm.
Just a suggestion, Grace, if
Yeah.
others are on the same page as Josephine as far as interest in the Indian Act, it's
Yeah.
a pretty impactful experience, I think.
Yeah,
Was
that would
Wow.
be, I think that would be something that would be good for like June, because we don't really have any PDs, but this could be something that we could do. I don't know, I could put it out there, like on the principals, one of our principals meeting, and say, what do we want to do for June? Is it more student based, or do we want it to be school based as everybody? So we'll talk about it certainly, and Charlotte has certainly lit a fire here. Corky as well, actually, gave us our start there as well. But yeah, no, as basically a piggyback to Catherine's question there. So a lot of our language learners, our heritage learners, the ones that how can I say this, the individuals who have not captured their heritage, right? So and I do that with experience with the Dene culture that I was in. There were a lot of kids who did not want to learn Dene. They said it was a dying language. It was not useful for them. They weren't going to be using it in the English world. And it's the same thing with all of our other heritage language learners, and children, right? Even adults. So what would your suggestion be with your experiences with individuals who have denied their culture?
It's just like spinach and broccoli. They don't want to eat it, but it's really good for them. So you just disguise it. You disguise it to no ends. And so pretty soon they don't even know that they're eating spinach and broccoli, or that they're eating peas or carrots. It's like, oh, this tastes so good. And you can make it into smoothies, and you can make it into all kinds of things. So the same thing with language. And so with language, we make it, we put it into songs, we put it into into memes, and we put it into buttons, and we put it into things that are tangible items. And so people are making cards. There's cards that people are making for the conjugating, and there's games. There's a Scrabble game for Cree. So I mean, all those kinds of things requires energy. It requires somebody who can think outside the box and still deliver on language. But that's really what it is. It's having to disguise the peas and the carrots and the spinach and the broccolis, and and just saying, but it's not broccoli, it's not language, it's a song, or it's something cool that everybody's doing. So first of all, we have to find out what's cool, what are the apps that people are using, and how can we bring language into it, so that language all of a sudden becomes a part of it, and they don't even know they're doing language. It's like, oh, I'm not doing language, I'm having fun. And so if individuals are having fun doing something, and if language is mixed into it, they don't even know that they're doing language. But all of a sudden they're becoming more friends with the language, because language is often seen as, it's not my friend because I don't see it regularly enough. It just comes to visit once a year. So if you have family or friends that you only see once a year, you have to work hard at maintaining that relationship. And how do you do it? You do it by having fun. When you have fun with somebody, then you want to see them again. If you're not having fun with somebody, you don't want to see them again. You don't care if you see them again. And so, bringing it in and just having lots of fun with it, and starting small. I think, the language, I think it's called The Language Warriors Manifesto with Anton Truer, is another book, and it's an audio book, and he has some videos out as well. he's a professor in Minnesota that teaches at the university. And so, he brings it into everything that he does. And it just becomes a manifesto. So it just becomes everything that you do is in the language, about the language. So, when I go to Timmy's, when I go get my Timmy's coffee, they ask for the order and you say it in English, or you can say it in your language or our languages, and we can also teach somebody what that means. So biag is one. So biag, niso niso. So it's one, I'll have one double double. Or you want to have a maskigewapoy. So maskigewapoy is a tea. And so they're like, you want what? It's like maskigewapoy, I want a tea. And so, just being able to teach in the bank, being able to teach at the grocery store, there's money, there's counting, and so all of a sudden we get learners from all different walks of life that never knew what those words were. And so just being able to have fun in the language and to treat that language as something that is like a fire that you don't want to go out, because you want to keep that fire going. And even if there's just like a few embers left, you breathe on it, and that's what keeps the fire going. So it's like, I need somebody to breathe on the language, and the only way you can breathe on the language is to say a word. So even if you're saying hello over and over again, or you're saying I love you. So we're coming up to February. So our theme is coming into Kisagiitin, Sagiituin. So, all around the theme of February. So the Valentine's Day themes and all those, the hearts and all the love that people are expressing, and just making it fun. We have to have fun every day in our lives, or we won't be very much fun to be around if we're not seeing the lighter things in life. So those are just some of the suggestions I have anyway.
Oh, thank you. Yes, I know having fun is a key, even with the older kids, and did experience that this weekend when I said, okay, boys and girls, you need to go and put away your books, and they're like, what? Where are we going? I'm like, your time to go home. And they were like, no, it was a short class. And I'm like, nope, you have to go home. So I mean, like, and they were playing fun. We were having games and stuff, so they did not want to stop. But yes, having fun and hopefully, inspiring them to spread that message as well, that language. Thank you so much, Charlotte, for gracing your enlightenment with our group here. And we look forward to, a lot of more of your sharing, and I know you do have lots. You had a whole list there that we had to pick from. So yeah, so if there's if anybody else have any questions, like I said, I will be sending over Charlotte's PowerPoint and her email, and you're welcome to reach out to her. And hopefully, Charlotte, we'd be able to meet with you in person. Anytime you come to Edmonton and in a downtown area, just let us know. Our office is in the downtown Edmonton area.
I will, for sure. I have family in Edmonton too. So I was talking to a friend of mine today. I was like, I have to get to Edmonton sometime soon. I don't know when, but hopefully it's a little bit warmer when I get there.
That's good.
That's good. Well, thank you so much. And thank you everybody for coming. We are trying to have, in-person and Zoom professional developments, and hopefully this Zoom we'll have another one, I think, sometime in the spring. So we're spreading out the love.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Bye.
And there isn't any way to say goodbye in Cree. So muistas.
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 Maraming salamat. You can end the recording.
Yeah.
Can you make me a co-host as well as, I'm not sure, could you make me and Charlotte a co-host? No?